Hey guys, Shen Hao over here, and today I'll be unraveling the motivation behind the range update range query Fenwick tree. So I assume that you are already familiar with the point update range query as well as the range update point query Fenwick trees. So today we'll be talking about how we can use two Fenwick trees to maintain a piecewise linear function that keeps track of the contributions and all that. So yeah, let's jump right into it. So let's say we have one indexed array A over here, and we've calculated its prefix sum. So we want to keep track of how the prefix sum changes when we update the array, let's say from index 3 to 5. So let's say we do a range add of 3 from index 3 to 5. How does the prefix sum change? The prefix sum changes in the following manner, right? Namely, we see that from index 1 to 2 is affected by 0, right? It's not affected at all. From index 3 to 5 is affected by a variable amount, and from index 6 to 8 is affected by a constant amount. So how do we encode these changes of the prefix sum mathematically? So if we observe over here, if we query within index 3 to 5, right, and only within 3 to 5, right, then the new prefix sum is just the original one plus the index minus 2 times 3. So as an example, if we look at index 4, how does the prefix sum change at index 4? It changes by 4 minus 2, which is 2 times 3. So of course this minus 2 over here is just specific to this update in this scenario, but the reason why I write it out like that is because this is a simple example we can start off on. So it will prove useful to expand it out, right? And why? It's because we'll eventually use one Fenwick tree to keep track of the linear term over here, linear in index, right? And another Fenwick tree to keep track of the constant term over here. So we'll worry about this constant term later, right? Let's look at the brown term over here first. Let's worry about the slope. So yeah, so the challenge in so how do we keep track of this function over here? Note that this function over here, right, that we've written out and expanded, it only applies within indices 3 to 5. So we do not want indices 1 to 2 or 6 to 8 to know about this function essentially. We do not want them to know about the slope, right, because the variable change is only within indices 3 to 5. So to do so, we can use a range update Fenwick tree, and we can update the first Fenwick tree from indices 3 to 5 with the slope, with the value of the slope. So sometimes you see in blocks, right, they write it as we use a Fenwick tree to keep track of the coefficient of the piecewise linear function. But what is this piecewise linear function over here, right? It actually looks something like this, and you can see that the Fenwick tree over here the Fenwick tree over here now represents the slope of this function. So for example, if we query at index 4, right, we see that the slope is 3, so we see that there's a positive gradient. But if we query at index 7, right, then we see that the Fenwick tree will return 0, and that's because the piecewise linear function here has a slope of 0. But what is this piecewise linear function representing? This piecewise linear function actually represents the contributions to the prefix sum due to the range update, right? So we see that because we did a range update from indices 3 to 5, right, the prefix sum changes accordingly in row 3. And how does it change, right? You see that in indices 1 to 2, it changes by 0, which is why we see a 0 over here in the piecewise linear function. And then in the middle over here, from indices 3 to 5, it changes by a linearly increasing value, which is why from indices 3 to 5 you see a positive gradient, positive and constant gradient. And from indices 6 to 8, we see that it changes by a constant amount, right, which is 9, which is why over here in indices 6 to 8 there's a constant value of 9. So of course this piecewise linear function, it doesn't really make sense to go for, let's say, decimal values, right? So actually the contributions to the prefix sum is actually plotted as a bar graph, right? But we linearly interpolate between the discrete points in order to obtain this piecewise linear function. So that's just a bit of That's just a bit of light. That's just shining a bit of light on the terminology that is used out there. So back to topic, right? Back on track, right? We have successfully kept track of the slope of the piecewise linear function. How about the constant terms, right? What about this minus 2 times 3? Likewise, right? Similar to the slope, we only want indices 3 to 5 to know about this minus 2 times 3. So in the second Fenwick tree, right, we insert minus 2 times 3 at index 3. But shouldn't we, you may be wondering right now, shouldn't we have a plus 2 times 3 at index 6? Well, yes, kind of, but I'll get back to it later. And that's because if we do a plus 2 times 3 at index 6, right, then we've forgotten about the constant contributions to the prefix sum over here, right? We don't want it to be 0. We want it to be 9. So how do we know a value to add at 6? Right? To figure it out, we do a bit of math, and this is also often the series of math steps that you will see in blocks. So the question that they're actually answering, and we are actually interested in, is how does the range update, right, from indices 3 to 5 of a value of plus 3, how does this range add affect the prefix sum? And the answer is that it depends on the index. So the prefix sum, right, query of x, right, query at the index x, if x is less than 3, right, if x is 1 or 2, right, then it's not affected at all. The query is not affected. The contribution is 0. If the query is between 3 and 5, the contribution is 3 times x minus 2. And if the query is between 6 and 8, right, if the query is after 5, if the query is outside of the range add, then it is affected by a constant amount. The contribution is constant, or 3 times 3. And so if we write this in a different manner, right, we do a bit of rearranging, we can see that we can separate these contributions into a term that depends on the index and a term that doesn't. So this term linearly depends on the index, and that is kept track by the first Fenwick tree, and the second term is kept track by the second Fenwick tree. So you can see that I've color coded everything over here, right? All the green values over here, right, it corresponds to the values that you get if you query the Fenwick tree, the first Fenwick tree. And all the constant values over here, it corresponds to the values you get if you query the second Fenwick tree. So as example, right, if you query the first Fenwick tree at index 4, right, you get a value of 3, and that makes sense because 4 is between 3 and 5, right? We see that the contribution is 3 times x. So what about this x, right? We need to modify the query function. Then if we query, let's say we query Fenwick 2, right, at index 7, right, what is the value we're going to get? We're going to be 5 times 3 plus minus 2 times 3, which is 3 times 3, which makes sense because 5 times 3 is what you want to add to the second Fenwick tree if you want to, number 1, compensate the minus 2 times 3 that was added at index 3, and number 2, if you want to obtain the value, the constant contribution by querying the second Fenwick. So this, just now we were asking the question of what do we put in indices 6, 7, and 8, right? Now we know the answer is actually this one minus this one. So yeah, so now the updated query function now becomes Fenwick of 1 of x times x plus Fenwick of 2 of x. So in code it looks something like that, right? I'll just quickly step through what each of the line corresponds to. So the first line is here, the second line is here, the third line is here, and the fourth line is here. So yeah, so I hope that helps. I know the pace is a bit fast, so feel free to step back and revisit the slides at your own pace. I will also upload the slides in the description below. So let's take a look at the graphical representation of what is going on for each of the steps. So when we start off, right, let's start off with a linear line, right, provided by the Fenwick of 1 of x times x. So we want to morph this linear line into the goal function, because the goal function is the piecewise linear function that represents the contributions to the prefix sum caused by the range update. So that was a bit of a mouthful, so let me repeat that again, right? By updating a range 3 to 5 with the value of +3, right, it has affected the array and hence the prefix sum. How did it affect the prefix sum? It affected it by this way, and the contributions to the prefix sum is given by this goal function over here we have in green. And so how do we morph this linear line we have into the green function? So first of all, in the first Fenwick we can add v only at index a, which means that if we query the Fenwick before index a, it's not going to see this v at all. So if we query the Fenwick before index 3, it's going to see a slope of 0. So we have settled the first segment, right? How about the third segment? We want to flatten out the third segment. So to do so, we can add -v at index b plus 1, and that basically flattens out the slope, right? So if we now query the first Fenwick tree, if we query Fenwick 1 after index b, then we're going to get a result of 0, and hence the slope after index b is 0. And we've achieved so by adding -v to cancel out the effects of this +v. Okay, so now we can see that the slope of our yellow function matches the slope of the green function, and all that's left to do is to add the constant so we can translate the different segments to align with the goal function. So we can subtract v times a minus 1 to push down the yellow segment to meet the green segment. And we only do so at index a because we do not want to affect the values before a, right? And then we can add v times b at index b plus 1 to push up the third segment to meet the goal function. So this is just the way I see it. This is my geometrical interpretation, right? And using these 4 operations, we have successfully morphed the linear line that we started off with into the goal function. So basically, these 2 Fenwick trees, right, along with the appropriate updates, help us keep track of the changes to the prefix sum, right? And the changes to the prefix sum are piecewise linear functions. And these piecewise linear functions, right, can be represented by the gradient and the y offset, which is kept track by the 2 Fenwick trees. Yeah. So I'm sorry if that was a bit circular and confusing. I encourage you to step through these slides at your own pace. So one question that I had myself when I did it was, why would this hold up against multiple updates? It wasn't really clear to me, but I think it's more intuitive. It became more intuitive to me when I started thinking of the Fenwick trees as range update point queries rather than point update range queries. So what I mean is that when I take a look at the code over here, right, there's 4 lines of code. Instead of thinking each of the lines as a point update, right, think of 2 lines together as a range update. So the first two lines represent the range update, and the first 2 lines represent the range update to the slope Fenwick tree, and then the other 2 lines, the third and fourth line, represent the range update to the constant Fenwick tree. So I hope that helps. If you have a different intuition, please leave it in the description. Please leave it in the comments below. I'll be interested to learn from it. And extensions of this, right? We realize that if we do a range add by a constant value, it leads to a linear prefix sum, which means that if we do a range add by a linearly increasing value, right, by arithmetic progression, right, we'll obtain a quadratic change to the prefix sum. So this quadratic change to a prefix sum would mean that we need 3 Fenwicks to keep track of changes, right? And it looks something like that. I forgot the linear term times x over here. Yeah, so the following problems roughly have involved this concept, and although the editorials involve segment trees, I think it'll be a good exercise to test your understanding of this piecewise linear function thing by solving these questions using Fenwick trees. So if not, I've come to the end of my video. Yeah, thank you very much. Oh, and before I leave, these questions, right, can be found in the graph as such, right, and I'll leave so this graph, just a quick explanation, right. All the yellow nodes over here represent the resources that I found on the web relating to the Fenwick tree. Yeah, and I'll leave this project link in the description below as well. Have a nice day.